What's going on, everyone? So I was finishing up some last-minute Christmas shopping yesterday afternoon, running around trying to get everything done before the stores closed, and I had First Take playing on my phone through my headphones while I was driving between places. I wasn't really paying super close attention at first because I figured they'd just be doing their usual debate format about the games that happened on Christmas Day and maybe some playoff predictions. But then I got stuck in traffic and actually started listening more carefully, and I heard Courtney Cronin transition into this segment about the 49ers injury situation and playoff positioning. I was expecting them to just talk about George Kittle's ankle and whether he'd play against the Bears, the standard injury report stuff we hear every week. But then the conversation took this completely unexpected direction, where they started discussing the 49ers quarterback depth and future planning, and Malik Willis's name came up in a way that actually made way more sense than I initially thought it would. Let me walk you through everything that went down on the show, because the way they connected the 49ers' current situation to their long-term roster construction needs, including potentially adding a dynamic backup quarterback like Willis, was actually really thoughtful and well-reasoned. So they opened this particular segment with Courtney giving an injury update directly from what sounded like her living room, since she mentioned not going to Santa Clara that day, even though the 49ers had practiced. She started going through the injury report, and the first big name she mentioned was George Kittle, who did not practice with his ankle injury. Courtney was saying it's becoming more and more common to hear speculation that he's not going to play in Sunday's game against the Chicago Bears, although Kyle Shanahan said on Wednesday that they still had hope he could play and they hadn't ruled him out yet. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we dive in, I need 1 second of your time. That like button right there? Hitting it now makes a massive difference in reaching more fans with this content. I know you're ready for the breakdown, but real quick, just smash that like button. It's the single most powerful way to support this channel and help the algorithm push this to thousands more people. Every like matters, so do me that favor right now. But Courtney was emphasizing how Kittle suffered the ankle injury Monday night against Indianapolis, and it's a really quick turnaround to get back out there. It's not a serious ankle sprain from what she understood, which is the good news, but George Kittle looks very uncertain to be back in the starting lineup for Sunday night. Monica McNutt jumped in here talking about how this puts more pressure on the 49ers' other offensive weapons because Kittle is such a key part of what they do, both in the passing game and as a blocker in the run game. Then Courtney moved on to Ricky Pearsall, saying there was more positive news about him. He had limited practice time with his ankle and knee injuries that he suffered in the game against Tennessee. Pearsall didn't play Monday night against Indianapolis, but he remained in Santa Clara and didn't travel to Indy. Courtney was saying it looks like he's progressing well and is now out there practicing at least in limited fashion, which is important for getting him back into the lineup. Ryan Clark chimed in, talking about how the 49ers need all hands on deck for this playoff push, and losing guys like Kittle and Pearsall for extended periods could really derail their momentum. But he also made this interesting point about how the 49ers have had to deal with injuries all season long, and they've managed to keep winning, which speaks to both their depth and their coaching. RC was setting up a theme that would become more important later in the conversation: the 49ers' ability to develop players and keep multiple guys ready to contribute. Courtney continued with the injury report, mentioning that Renardo Green looks like he'll be back in the lineup after missing time, and that Trent Williams was held out for scheduled maintenance with his hamstring issues. She talked about how the 49ers are just trying to make sure they get Williams to the starting line for each game without stressing him out too much during the week and risking a recurrence of those injuries. Then she mentioned Tatum Bethune would be out there at full participation, and there's a big decision coming about what they're going to do at middle linebacker now that Eric Kendricks is getting more and more up to speed. But here's where the conversation started shifting toward quarterback depth and roster construction in a way that would eventually lead to the Malik Willis discussion. Courtney mentioned Curtis Rohr, whose practice window will be closing next week, and how they expect him to remain on the non-football injury list. She talked about how the 49ers wanted to open up that practice window just to see what they had with him, And from what she's heard, they like what he's doing running scout team stuff. And this is where it got interesting. Courtney mentioned that the 49ers have 4 quarterbacks in the building. Brock Purdy is obviously taking all the first-team reps, Mason Jennings is taking most of the scout team reps, and then there's Curtis Rohr plus Adrian Martinez, who they brought back a couple weeks ago. Perk jumped in here making a joke about how that's a lot of quarterbacks for one team to have on the roster. But Courtney explained that Rohr, who played his final season at Indiana with a torn ACL and had surgery in January to repair it, was always going to be basically a redshirt year since they drafted him in the 7th round. But Monica made this really insightful observation about how the 49ers' approach to the quarterback position has evolved over the last few years. She talked about how they've dealt with injuries to Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, and even Brock Purdy during his rookie year, and those experiences have made them very conscious of needing quality depth at the position. Monica was making the point that you can't just have a starter and a warm body as your backup. You need guys who can actually come in and win games if called upon. RC agreed and started talking about how the league has changed in terms of valuing backup quarterback. He mentioned how teams used to just carry veteran journeymen as backups, but now you're seeing more teams trying to develop younger guys or finding backups who bring different skill sets than the starter. And that's when the conversation started pivoting toward what the 49ers might do in the offseason to address their quarterback depth behind Brock Purdy. Courtney transitioned to talking about the playoff picture, mentioning how the Detroit Lions were eliminated from the playoffs with their loss to the Minnesota Vikings on Christmas Day. She showed this tweet from Pro Football Talk that said, "It's amazing how common the Lions are. Windows open and close faster than you think." And Courtney was making this broader point about how championship windows in the NFL are incredibly fragile and unpredictable. She went on this really interesting tangent about how there was so much talk after the Super Bowl, and especially last season when the 49ers went 6-11, and then this year when they lost all those free agents in mid-March, about how the 49ers' championship window was closing or had already closed. But Courtney has always avoided talking about windows opening and closing because you just never know how things are going to play out. She used the example of the Detroit Lions having a 17-point lead over the 49ers in January 2024 in the NFC Championship game, and most people looking at those two teams thought the Lions were the team on the rise, while the 49ers, with their veteran roster, were the ones who would struggle to keep everything together. But now, just 1 year later, the Lions were the #1 seed in 2024, but lost in the first round of the postseason. And now this year, they're eliminated before the playoffs even start. Meanwhile, the 49ers are in contention for the #1 seed in the NFC playoff. Perk was nodding along saying, "This proves you can't take anything for granted in this league, that rosters can flip faster than anyone expects, and organizations need to be constantly planning for the future while trying to win now." And this is where the Malik Willis connection started becoming clearer, even though they hadn't explicitly mentioned him yet. The entire conversation was about championship windows, roster construction, planning for contingencies, and making sure you have the right pieces in place before you need them. All of that framework applies directly to why the 49ers might be interested in adding a young athletic backup quarterback like Malik Willis. Monica brought the conversation back to the current playoff picture, talking about how 6 teams have already clinched playoff berths, the 3 division winners, and the teams that qualified through wild-card spots. She mentioned that Seattle and the 49ers control their own destiny for the #1 spot and the top position in the NFC West, while the Rams still remain in contention for the #1 seed as well. RC made this observation that the worst-case scenario for both the 49ers and the Seahawks would be for the Rams to win the division and get the #1 overall seed with that week off and home field advantage. He was talking about how the Rams' offense is good, Matthew Stafford is probably going to win MVP, and that young defensive line is very impressive. The best chance of beating the Rams would be to just make them play more games, so more things can potentially go wrong. But here's where Courtney brought it back to roster construction and depth, which is where the Malik Willis discussion would eventually connect. She was talking about how the 49ers offensive line has played really well lately, and maybe their philosophy in the draft of not reaching for an offensive lineman was justified. She mentioned how Jennifer and her had discussed on the 49ers Talk podcast how the offensive line had probably their best game of the season Monday night against Indianapolis, really getting the run game going with McCaffrey averaging 5.6 yards per carry and protecting Brock Purdy very well. Courtney went through each position on the offensive line, saying she thinks Trent Williams is coming back next season because he's playing at such a high level and showing no signs of slowing down. Colton McKivitz has established himself as one of the top tackles in the game. Dominic Pooney is a long-term fixture, and Jake Brendel has been exceptional as a rookie center. The question becomes what to do at left guard, and maybe they draft someone who could play guard as a rookie and then transition to tackle later when Trent Williams is done. But then Courtney transitioned to talking about the 49ers' other offseason needs, and this is where wide receiver became the focus. She mentioned Ricky Pearsall bouncing back from injury, Deebo Samuel Robinson under contract for next year, Jordan Watkins starting to see action, and Jacob Cowing in what's been basically a redshirt year. Then she started listing the wide receivers scheduled for unrestricted free agency. Jawan Jennings has to be the top priority. Kendrick Bourne might not be back. And Skyway Moore has really thrived in the 49ers environment. Perk jumped in talking about Jawan Jennings and what he's worth on the open market, saying the 49ers aren't going to pay him more than $20 million a year, but he can't imagine any other team paying him that much either. Jennings is incredibly valuable both as a blocker and pass catcher, with his third down playmaking and red zone efficiency. But what does that translate to in dollar? Monica added that Jennings's attitude and mentality are just as valuable as his on-field production. And finding guys who fit your culture is harder than people think. And this is where everything started connecting to Malik Willis. Even though they still hadn't mentioned him by name, the conversation was all about roster construction, evaluating talent, finding guys who fit your system and culture, and making smart decisions in free agency and the draft. All of that applies to the quarterback position just as much as it does to receiver or offensive line. RC brought up Spencer Burford at left guard being scheduled for free agency, and whether he'll have starting opportunities elsewhere, or if the 49ers will pay him starting money to keep him. Then Courtney listed the other free agents. Kicker Eddie Pinheiro, who she thinks is a high priority to re-sign, punter Thomas Morstead getting up there in age, but still effective, special teams ace Tarek Embry, and long snapper John Weeks. But then Monica circled back to the quarterback situation and made this observation that I thought was really important. She said that with Curtis Rohr being a 7th-round pick who's essentially redshirting this year, and with Mason Jennings being more of a veteran backup than a long-term solution, the 49ers are going to need to think seriously about their quarterback depth chart beyond just this season. What happens if Brock Purdy gets injured? Do you feel comfortable with Jennings coming in and winning playoff games? What's the succession plan if something happens to Purdy long-term? And that's when Malik Willis entered the conversation explicitly. Perk mentioned how Willis has shown flashes of really competent and dynamic play when he's had opportunities as a backup for the Green Bay Packers. The league values backups who can come in and actually win games rather than just hold the fort, and Willis has proven he can do that. He's got a strong arm, he's incredibly mobile, and he brings a different dynamic than what most teams have with their starter. Courtney jumped on this, saying that Willis is going to be an unrestricted free agent in the 2026 offseason, which means he could be a relatively low-cost option for teams looking to add quality quarterback depth. For a team like the 49ers that's demonstrated they value having multiple quarterbacks in the building and developing guys over time, Willis represents exactly the kind of addition that would make sense. RC made this great point about how the 49ers' offensive system under Kyle Shanahan could actually maximize what makes Willis special. Shanahan has shown he can work with mobile quarterbacks and design plays that take advantage of their athleticism while also developing their passing ability. If you could get Willis into that system as a backup behind Purdy, you'd have a guy who could come in if needed and run a lot of the same concepts while also bringing that scrambling ability that Purdy doesn't have. Monica brought up the 49ers' recent history with quarterback injuries as a major motivation for why they'd want someone like Willis. She listed Trey Lance's injuries, Jimmy Garoppolo's various ailments, and even Purdy's elbow injury that required surgery. The 49ers have learned the hard way that you can't assume your starter will be healthy all season, and having quality depth at quarterback isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Willis gives you that depth while also bringing upside and potential that most backups don't have. Perk was agreeing enthusiastically, saying that Willis's contract situation makes this even more attractive. If he's coming off his rookie deal and hitting free agency, he's not going to command huge money like established starters do. The 49ers could probably sign him to a reasonable 1- or 2-year deal that gives them flexibility while also giving Willis a chance to develop in one of the best offensive systems in the league. But Courtney made this observation that I think really captured why Willis makes sense for San Francisco specifically. The 49ers have shown they're willing to be patient with quarterbacks and develop them over time. They didn't rush Brock Purdy into the starting role. They let him learn behind Jimmy G and compete with Trey Lance. And when his opportunity came, he was ready. They could do the same thing with Willis. Bring him in as a backup, let him learn the system, develop his passing mechanics and decision-making, and if something happens to Purdy, you have a guy who can step in and run the offense effectively. RC brought up another angle that I hadn't considered. The difference in skill sets between Purdy and Willis could actually be valuable from a game planning perspective. Purdy is excellent at everything he does, but he's not a running threat the way Willis is. If the 49ers get into a playoff game and need to change up their approach or catch a defense off guard, having Willis available gives them the option to use designed quarterback runs, read option plays, and other concepts that they couldn't run with Purdy. That kind of flexibility could be huge in January and February. Monica was nodding along, saying that the modern NFL is all about having multiple options and being unpredictable. Teams that can only do one thing, that can only play one style, are easier to defend in the playoffs. Adding Willis to the quarterback room doesn't mean you don't believe in Purdy. It means you're giving your coaching staff more tools to work with and more ways to attack defenses. The conversation then shifted to talking about the specific timeline of when this could happen. Courtney mentioned that the trade deadline for the 2025 season has already passed, so any move for Willis would have to wait until the offseason. But that actually works in the 49ers' favor, because they'll have a better sense of their salary cap situation. They'll know which of their own free agents they're re-signing, and they can make a more informed decision about what they need at quarterback. Perk made the point that the 49ers will also be able to see how Willis finishes the season with Green Bay and what kind of opportunities he gets down the stretch. If he plays well and shows continued development, that increases his value, but also confirms he's worth pursuing. If he struggles or doesn't get much playing time, maybe they look elsewhere or stick with their current depth chart. But RC kept coming back to this idea of championship windows and maximizing opportunities while you have them. He was saying that the 49ers are clearly in win-now mode with their roster. They've got established stars at most positions. They're in cap trouble because they've paid their guys, and they need to win in the next year or two while this core is still together. That means you can't afford to waste a season because your backup quarterback couldn't win games when the starter got hurt. Willis represents insurance against that scenario. He's not going to cost significant draft capital since he'd be a free agent signing. He's not going to break the bank financially, but he gives you a legitimate chance to keep winning games if Purdy goes down, which is invaluable for a team trying to win Super Bowl. Monica summed it up perfectly when she said, "You can't put a price on peace of mind when it comes to the quarterback position." Courtney wrapped up this part of the discussion by mentioning that she'll be back out in Santa Clara on Friday for interviews with John Lynch and Chris Collinsworth, and those interviews will be on the 49ers Talk podcast over the weekend. She also mentioned sitting down with Greg Papa, who's returning to the booth to call Sunday night's game against the Bears after battling cancer and being quarantined. The excitement in her voice about Papa being back was genuine, and it was a nice human moment in an otherwise analytical discussion. What really resonated with me about this entire First Take segment was how the panel didn't just talk about the 49ers' current injury situation in isolation. They connected it to broader themes about roster construction, championship windows, organizational philosophy, and long-term planning. The Malik Willis discussion wasn't forced or out of nowhere. It grew organically from talking about quarterback depth, the value of having mobile backups, and the 49ers' history of developing quarterbacks in their system. The case they made for Willis makes a ton of sense when you think about it. He's young, he's athletic, he's shown he can win games when called upon, he'll be affordable, and he fits the profile of what the 49ers look for in quarterback. He wouldn't be threatened by Brock Purdy being the established starter. He'd get to learn from one of the best offensive minds in football in Kyle Shanahan, and he'd be in position to contribute immediately if needed, while also developing for a potential larger role down the line. So what do you guys think? Should the 49ers pursue Malik Willis in free agency this offseason? Or should they stick with their current quarterback depth chart and use their resources elsewhere? And if they did sign Willis, would you be comfortable with him as the backup, knowing he'd have to step in if Purdy got injured during a playoff run? Let me know in the comments, because after watching First Take break down the 49ers situation and connect all these dots to Willis, I'm pretty convinced. It's a move that makes sense for everyone involved. The 49ers get quality depth at a crucial position, and Willis gets a chance to develop in one of the best systems in the league while competing for a Super Bowl.